Welcome back to the SAHMA Exchange, a podcast where policy, people, and property management meet. Today's conversation really gets to the heart of what senior housing is all about. Because when we talk about housing in this industry, we're not just talking about buildings or compliance. We're talking about people's lives, their routines, their choices, and their sense of control over how they live each day. And in senior housing especially, that creates a really important and sometimes really difficult question. How do we keep residents safe without taking away the independence and dignity that make a place feel like home? So today, we're diving into that balance, and I'm really excited to be joined by Eric Kager, Executive Vice President at Benchmark Management Corporation, and Ron Budynas, Chief Operating Officer at Wesley Living. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks, Renee. Happy to be here.
Right now, there are more than 2 million seniors living in affordable housing across the U.S., and that number is only growing as more people age into these communities. So before I got into the complexities with both of our guests, I wanted to start off simple. I asked them, when they thought about senior housing, what does it actually mean to them?
I would say, for starters, it means safety, independence, and place where they want to feel comfortable.
I mean, it means the same thing it means to you and I. It's a place where we go where, it meets all of our needs. If we go by Maslow, it meets all the physiological needs. But it also offers us a quality of life that we want to enjoy. So if it meets those needs, then that's what we're looking for as a home.
That's such a helpful way to think about it. Maslow's hierarchy of needs really reminds us that once basic safety is met, people don't just stop there. They're still looking for connection, purpose, and control over their lives. And I think that's where this conversation really comes into focus. So from Ron and Eric's perspective, I wanted to know, what are seniors actually telling them right now? What do they need, and what do they want out of these communities?
I'm going to say this, that most of what I decide that the residents need is based on observation, because they really don't know what they need or what they want.
That's kind of true for all of us, though, Ron, isn't it?
It is. I kind of experienced it with a service coordinator one day. I went in with her into a senior's apartment, and I watched her do an interview, and she was like, well, how are you doing? Do you have everything you need? And the resident was like, oh, yeah, everything is great. It's all hunky-dory. And then she said, the service coordinator was observing the apartment and saw some, dishes kind of piled up in the sink, and she needed a little bit of cleaning. And so the service coordinator said, well, wouldn't it be nice if you had somebody that could come in here and help you do some of these things? And she was like, oh, yeah, that would be great. So a lot of times they just don't even know what to ask for. You really have to observe and see where they're struggling and where things might help them, and then be able to fill those needs.
I think for seniors that there is a lot of truth to that. I believe the ones that think they do know what they want, that will tell you, it really does, especially nowadays, a lot of it comes down to, feeling safe, with the way of the world now. But I think the other thing that we hear a lot is with landlords trying to automate and use AI and technology, a lot of them just still feel like they want good old-fashioned customer service. So that we try to balance that.
That's really good. You guys have both mentioned a couple of things. You've mentioned safety. You've mentioned some independence. Eric, that's a really interesting conversation on customer service and AI, and probably it's a relationship piece too. I'd imagine some of your seniors maybe feel forgotten or feel lonely, and so maybe that's part of that. But I'd love for you guys to talk about these three words a little bit: safety, independence, and dignity. How do they show up in the day-to-day work that you both do?
Safety is always a feeling. It's not as tangible as you think it is. Some people that I have, some of my residents that live in more rural areas, feel safe with a lot fewer things than some of the people in some of our urban areas have to have. They might not need fences out in one place, and we have to have them in someplace else. So it's kind of an intangible thing. It's a feeling, and usually the residents, kind of like what Eric was saying a little bit earlier, the residents are usually pretty good at telling you whether they feel safe or not, and when they feel threatened and what's threatening them, and they're really aware of that, especially seniors. They're aware of safety probably a lot more than a lot of us are. So they're pretty vocal about that.
Yeah. What are some of the things this is a bonus question for you, Ron. What are some of the things that you hear make them feel unsafe? There's probably some of the traditional, normal fear of violence or those sorts of things, but what makes them feel unsafe, do you think?
Well, one of the biggest things is when they see people they don't recognize. And of course, when you're in a rural area, they know everybody. So when they see somebody they don't recognize, that's a really big flag there. It happens a lot more often in the urban areas, and that's why I think that they have to have those added security items like fences and cameras and access control and those kinds of things. Just because there's a lot less frequency of running into people that they don't know in rural areas as it compares to urban areas.
I'd imagine as a senior that probably gets hard too, especially if you're fighting dementia or memory loss and even here I sit not being a senior yet and I fight brain fog. And so just being tired and all the things, it can be really hard as a senior. I'm wondering, Eric, I want you to talk a little bit about independence for seniors at your properties and what maybe do you all do to help them feel more independent on a practical level?
I think independence, it's obviously tough for a lot of them, especially when they start going through, something like dementia or some early signs of memory loss and stuff that they're not quite probably understanding what's going on. And it gets frustrating for the site staff, to try to deal with problems or challenges at the site level. If it's hard to communicate with those residents that aren't quite understanding of what's going on and the problems that they might be causing and stuff like that. The bigger part to me when it comes to the independent piece, though, is sometimes from the operation side of running a property, there are things that we want to do, whether it's for safety, security, implementing some new technology, or whatever we're doing to try to better run those assets. And sometimes that to the senior feels like we're taking away some of their independence. So I know that's a challenge that they obviously deal with and then communicate as a frustration to the site staff, and the site team has to deal with that. And it's kind of this cyclical thing of us trying to run assets that not only are performing well as a business, but also providing the needs of those residents. And those things are always changing. So sometimes that does change their outlook on what they feel like they have when it comes to independence. And then we have to kind of keep going back and forth and, to give and take.
That conversation really painted a big picture of what senior residents are looking for right now. So I wanted to now bring this down to the property level, where those needs have to translate into real decisions every day. So I asked Eric and Ron, when they thought about safety, independence, and dignity, are there moments where those things ever come into conflict at their properties?
I think safety can somewhat infringe on their independence. If you become too restrictive, I'm a former Marine, so I could build someplace where it would be impenetrable. But who'd want to live there, right? Who'd want to call that their home? So you have to kind of be measured with some of the things that you do, in particular with safety, so that you don't really infringe on their independence and their dignity and the things that they want to do, that it doesn't really restrict those things. So it can be a real balance.
I think it's easy to say there's conflict between those three. The first thing that comes to mind is something along the lines of maybe like a reasonable accommodation or modification that's needed within a unit for a senior, especially when it comes to walk-in showers and stuff like that. Their dignity specifically, if they're better able to take care of themselves, their hygiene and those types of needs, having others involved and personal care aides and stuff like that, having to be there with them, I mean, that definitely helps their sense of that self-dignity and the independence and all those things that go along with it. And just their mental state of still being able to provide for themselves. So, from a safety perspective, we might not think, or that the family members of that person might not think that that's the best option. They might want them to have more care or more needs, resources to provide those needs. But I think that's where you start to see those things conflict, and safety is going to start taking away from independence and dignity sometimes.
About the age of 55, we start losing. We start losing strength. We start losing muscle mass. We start losing cognitive abilities, and it's a decline. As we get older, it's just a natural thing. And some people age faster and decline as faster than other people. And so what we try to do with our staff is to make sure that we emphasize that they allow the residents to do whatever they're capable of doing. Especially we can get into those problems with the service coordinators because they want to help everybody. They want to get out there and they want to really help everybody. And it's really easy for them to start doing things for the residents rather than assisting them and allowing them to do things for themselves. So we always kind of remind our staff that, hey, you stay independent. You're independent because you're doing things for yourself. And yeah, you might feel good at night when you go home because you did something for somebody, but did you really?
A really good point. So I feel like I'm in a classroom with you guys and I'm learning a lot right now. And so I'm thinking if you guys were to give me a pop quiz, and the first question is, in senior housing, which one gets prioritized? And my options are safety, independence, or dignity. I feel like I know what the answer is, just having learned a little bit from you guys in the first part of this conversation. But what's the answer? Is there A, B, C, and D, all of the above?
At the end of the day, it has to come down to safety, both for the resident and preserving the asset of what we do for a living. Again, those three words are all very important and they start to conflict with each other. But yeah, if I had to pick one that ends up getting prioritized, I would probably say safety.
Yeah, I'll fall back to Maslow again, and the lowest level is physiological, which includes safety. So I would have to agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? I passed your quiz then. That was the answer I would have put. So I feel pretty good about that.
Ron, we should have Renee's answer first.
Just to make sure. I promise you I did. I should have written it down on a piece of paper and held it up for you to see. All right. So I feel like this is where we're going to get into the nuts and bolts a little bit. Because in theory, we've talked about balance and it sounds really good, but in practice, right, if safety has to be prioritized, the balance can get thrown off a little bit. So I'd love for you guys to share a situation where safety concerns did challenge a resident's independence that you have experienced and what you did about that as an operator.
More than likely, I created the problem rather than solved it. When it comes to safety, we probably did something like access control, and now the resident's daughter can't just walk in the building and come and see them anytime they want to, or they have to get through a gate and somebody has to let them in, and so that irritates them. So I more likely created the problem of taking away what a resident would consider some of their independence than assisting it. But we're falling right back on that first priority of safety. So it's a balance. Like I say, we try to provide safety measures to the limit that they have to be provided, and try not to go above that. But we also don't want to go below that because then they actually do become unsafe.
Rick, how do you all handle residents who want to, I say take risks, but, I'm thinking of my husband's 96-year-old grandmother who so badly wants a cat in her assisted living facility, but she can't have a cat because she's got hip issues if she trips over the cat. Anyway, so I'm curious. I know how we handle that as a family with her, but how do you all as operators handle those things when they want to take risks like cooking or living alone? Maybe they shouldn't. When do you all step in and get involved?
It depends on the situation, obviously. Like you say cooking, and the first thing that comes to mind is We have some properties that are equipped with, some fire stop type of devices that are right above the cooktop. And, not that we don't want to be proactive and make sure that we're doing everything we can to preserve our asset, but we're probably a little bit more lenient, if we have somebody who wants to take that quote unquote risk, if the property is equipped with some of those devices versus a property that's not. So I think depending on the situation, depending on what that risk is and how high of a risk it is, engaging with the service coordinator, engaging with, family and friends that are close to that resident that want to be part of those conversations. We try to engage the family and the service coordinator as needed, and not be or try to be a decision maker for that resident, since it's really not our place. But again, always balancing letting that resident feel independent and enjoy their home versus making sure that we're doing what we can do to keep the building and all the other residents around them safe.
So I'm listening to you talk and I'm thinking about, my mind's kind of getting overwhelmed for you all in senior housing, because now you're taking all of the issues of affordable housing and you're adding on this extra layer of complexity with managing senior residents, right? So what's the line for you all between protecting your residents and maybe over managing them, so to speak? Is there a line? Have you figured it out? Because I would be like, I'm glad I'm not in your line of work, because I'd be in a fetal position trying to, I would be the social service coordinator trying to take care of everybody. And sometimes you can't do it all. So Ron, is there a line between both those things?
There is, and one of the things that I remind my staff of all the time is that we have fair housing that we have to go by as well, and so if they want to take a resident's trash out, they better be willing to take all the residents' trash out. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you can get with your staff and you can kind of tamp them down, make sure that they understand that these folks have to do for themselves. We can't just do everything for them. But yeah, there are limits, and I will admit that I have had staff that have exceeded those limits, and we've had to reel them back in again.
I'll just add to Ron's point that over managing, such as taking somebody's trash out for them, aside from the fair housing potential issues, but continuing to do more and more for them like that when you think you're helping. And Renee, you kind of alluded to this earlier. Ultimately, you're just kind of diminishing that autonomy and quality of life that those residents want. If that's what they're looking for, is just to remain independent, we're starting to take that away from them by thinking that we're helping them.
So you're telling me it's similar to raising a teenager or an early adult who's really trying to get their footing. And the more you do for them, the more you enable them to not get their footing, right? So it's kind of a similar.
More like a third grader, I think.
A third grader. I don't know. Sometimes I think my child in third grade did more than he did as a teenager, but that's another podcast, I think. Talked about taking out the trash and fair housing. How, just real quick on an elementary level, explain to me how that would violate fair housing.
The easy rule that I give my people is, if you're going to do something for one person, you better be willing to do it for everybody, because otherwise they're going to come in and say, oh, you're discriminating against me because you don't like me, or you're discriminating against me because I'm handicapped, or I'm this, or I'm that, or I'm that. So unless you're willing to do it for everybody, don't do it for one person.
That makes perfect sense. I was really thankful for that quick fair housing refresher from Ron and Eric. I think it's important that sometimes we pause and remind ourselves of some of these regulations and things we need to follow for just to protect our properties and to protect ourselves and to protect our residents. I was curious, though, what has been a moment where Ron and Eric have looked back at that have been made at their properties and said, oh, maybe we got that wrong. Let's hear what they have to say.
Sure, the answer for both of us is yes.
Yeah.
You just don't want to admit what it was.
No, I'm trying to think of it.
Yeah, I think it's a good example. We actually have not deployed a lot of AI assisted technology at affordable sites at this point. But we have on other parts of the business, and I have been hesitant to do it with the affordable portfolio because I've had that feeling elsewhere of maybe we got this wrong. So I would probably say not yet in the affordable world, but yes, in general, by thinking that we're doing the right thing and adding some additional technology to something, but ultimately it backfires because you're taking the human component out of, working with people, the customer service side of things. You frustrate residents or prospects by letting them go through an AI assisted phone loop greeting on your phone or whatever that example is. And I would say that's probably one thing with recency bias of something that I wouldn't say got wrong completely, but something that deserves more attention, that you can't just, fall to those trendy things and think that they're going to solve all your problems.
I kind of have, now that you've said that, I kind of have two technology examples. One of them is that we do a lot of green stuff in our properties. We do a lot of energy conservation and green building type stuff in our buildings. And one of the buildings that I just did, we put Wi-Fi in the whole building, and I was able to put smart thermostats in as well. And so in order to conserve energy, I set the thermostats in a range that they could only set it in that range. They couldn't set it outside of that range. And after about 2 weeks of that, I think I had of 150 residents, I probably had 75 reasonable accommodation requests to change the zone of comfort. So that was a failure. I took off the zone. They can set it to whatever they want to now. The other one is probably, our software provider allows for a portal where the residents can go in and they can do their own stuff. They can do their own recertifications, and they can do work orders, and they can do all kinds of things. But, the problem is they got to have an email address, and they've got to have a password that they can remember. And then now they have two-factor authorization that they have to get through. And chances are by the time certification comes up, they can't remember any of those three. And so it's not working well. I will say, though, that we have been strongly looking at some of the AI stuff that's coming out, and we're strongly considering that. We actually use AI in a program for residents to try to alleviate isolation, and it's actually an AI that they can call and talk to like a person. And so, like, we had one resident who was a Yankees fan. And he called up the AI, and he's talking to him about Yankees, and they're actually swapping statistics of batters and winning records and losing records and who played when and what series. And the AI would actually remember these conversations. So when they called back again, they could pick up and they could start talking to him about the same thing all over again. And so for some people, that's worked out okay. There's a lot of reluctance, of course, by a lot of our residents to adopt new technology. But for the ones that have tried it, they have really liked it. Some of them have talked to the AI as long as 45 minutes or an hour.
Wow.
So,
wow, that's breaking this out into a whole different podcast. I feel like we've got the tale of Eric's AI use and Ron's AI use and how those mesh together. That's fascinating. That AI conversation truly was fascinating, and maybe that will be a podcast episode one day. It's exciting to see how AI is starting to support this balance in new ways and how different properties are using it. But at the end of the day, it's still your on-site teams who are making the calls in real time. So I wanted to talk to Eric and Ron about that. What kind of pressure are property teams feeling on a daily basis, especially when it comes to balancing resident satisfaction with liability concerns?
I can tell you that I'm the coordinator for our company for all of our insurance stuff. And I tell our people, we can't do our job without some risk of liability. I mean, it's just impossible. It's going to happen. We can do everything right, and somebody is still going to bring a lawsuit, because anybody can bring a lawsuit for anything. So, I kind of tell them, don't be afraid of doing whatever it is that you need to do. If you do the right thing, if you treat people the way they're supposed to be treated, and you follow policy, and you follow company philosophy, and you don't veer from that, then it doesn't matter if they sue us or not. We're going to win. You're going to do the right thing, and we're going to be okay. So that's the thing I try to drum into them is just do the right thing and you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, I second that wholeheartedly. We have a lot of team members that, at different times they feel like they're, in the middle of doing the right thing versus doing what they think fair housing tells them to do versus what the resident wants them to do versus what a service coordinator or a resident family member thinks that they should be doing for the resident. And yeah, follow policy procedure, make sure you're within fair housing guidelines, and you can't go wrong, right? Like we have policy and procedures for a reason. You make sure you're good with those in fair housing, and we're willing to deal with whatever risk there is on top of that.
I wanted to circle back to something we touched on earlier, because all of these decisions are happening within a regulatory framework. So I wanted to know, when Eric and Ron think about fair housing and other requirements, do those make it harder to strike that balance between safety, independence, and dignity in senior housing? Let's hear what they have to say.
When you agree with something along the lines of reasonable accommodations and modifications, I don't know if it makes it easier or harder. It definitely muddies the water and adds, red tape and procedural challenges, I guess, to doing the right thing.
Yeah, that's the first thing that came to my mind too. So especially reasonable accommodations, because it's so hard to discern when somebody is asking for something because they need it and they're asking for something because they want it. And you have to make sure that there's a nexus between what it is they're requesting and what it is that they're actually getting, and that it's providing what they need in order to be able to stay in the apartment. So that does get a little bit sticky with the fair housing issues. But it's, it's always customer service too. Somebody's requesting something that they want or need. If we can fulfill it, let's fulfill it, regardless of what the regulation says. And if it's unreasonable, then let's talk about why it's unreasonable and see if we can come to an agreement on what can be done instead. But yeah, it can really be a kind of a sticky wicket to try and run through. If I can't see, I have a problem with my vision. And I request a seeing eye dog. Well, of course, you're going to give somebody a seeing eye dog because they have vision problems. Or we've had a lot of people that started coming in and requesting roll-in showers. But when we looked at them, they were still ambulatory. They could still walk and move. So what we found is these kits where you can cut the side of the tub out and it's a step through. And that met their needs just probably better than a roll-in shower, because they were able to put the door on there and close the door, still take a bath. So sometimes it's just a matter of negotiation and trying to figure out what they actually need rather than what they're requesting. And as long as they can provide that nexus and say, here's my problem and here's where I'm having an issue in the apartment, what can you do for me? Then it's kind of easy to work out that way.
The tub step is a good example of something where you're solving a problem, but it's not really what the resident's intentions were, right? And we were, through expertise and experience, we're able to say this. We think this would meet your needs, and if they and a doctor's note agrees that solves the issue, until it doesn't, but that's a good solution. I think the tougher one is when the solutions are not flexible and the solution is unreasonable, and then you have to deliver that news.
And some of those could be like I've had people that have had a reasonable accommodation for a pet, for a assistive animal, but that dog bit somebody. So guess what? Now we've got a problem.
Right.
And even when you're navigating all of those regulations, there's still another layer to this: the role families play in these decisions. So how does communication with residents' families factor into this balance between safety, independence, and dignity?
It's kind of a mixed bag. Sometimes the family is the problem and sometimes not. For instance, I had a resident that wasn't paying her rent because she was giving all of her money to her granddaughter so that she could get a security system in her apartment. You know, but a lot of times, when you're having issues with the resident, sometimes the family can be really instrumental. For instance, driving is a big thing. That's a real loss of independence when somebody can't drive anymore. But there are times when we know that somebody should not be should not be on the road driving. And if you can get a family member to come in and help you with that, it's way easier than it is trying to deal with the resident one-on-one.
And when you step back from all of that, the policies, the decisions, the family dynamics, it really brings us back to something more fundamental. Because right now in the US, nearly 1 in 3 older adults is cost burdened, spending a significant portion of their income just to stay housed. So this isn't just about where someone lives, it's about how they live. At the end of the day, what does dignity actually look like in senior housing?
I think for me, it represents a quality of life. I think that if you have built a place where people can go to in their later years and have a great quality of life, then that's what we're striving for. And give you an example. I had a guy that moved into one of our properties up in Kentucky. Um, he moved in. He said, I've never lived any place with anything but a dirt floor before, and this is the first time I've had plumbing inside my home. When you can provide, I mean, just those basics, let alone all the other stuff that goes along with it, the support, the supporting structure that we have in the apartments and all of those things. When you can provide something for that they're having a quality of life better than they've ever had in their entire life, then you're hitting home runs.
Yeah, I agree. Quality of life is probably the easiest way to sum it up. I was going to say having a resident feel like they have some autonomy, some respect, and some privacy to live still independently is there. Again, kind of a different way of saying that quality of life, but those were the words that came to my mind.
It's really good. Along those lines, what is one thing you wish more people understood about aging as a senior in these affordable properties?
I would say, and I can say this because I think it's hard even for our own team members at times to understand this, and it's something that we try to talk to them about is, there's a lot of people that feel like when you move into senior housing, that independence is gone and they need all the help in the world. We have a lot of seniors that they are way more capable than people give them credit for. And to Ron's point earlier, sometimes you just have to let them be independent and let them do things that they want to do and then see what happened, right? And make the corrections or mitigate the risk as needed. Just doing everything for them, assuming that they can't, is not the right answer.
It's really
Yeah,
good.
I'll just add that I'll kind of take a general population view of this, of what I would want people that aren't associated with affordable housing, just Joe Blow the taxpayer. I'd like them to know that when folks come to us, most of the time these folks have worked their entire lives. Either that or they've been in a working family. It's a woman whose husband worked their entire life and she took care of the house and he died, and now she comes to us. But these folks aren't freeloaders. They haven't been out there just taking advantage of everything free that's out there. These are folks that have worked hard their entire lives, and they might not have had the jobs that paid them enough to fund their 401k, to $1 million so that they can afford to go and do whatever they want to do without having affordable housing. I have one lady who worked 3 jobs, put 3 kids through college, and now she spent her money to get her kids where they are today and didn't put it into a retirement account. So those are the kind of people that are coming to us. It's not just a bunch of freeloaders, and these folks deserve to have a retirement and a quality of life just like everybody else does.
I'm so glad you said that. We talk a lot about that on this podcast. I feel like it just naturally comes up every time because you all feel so passionate about kind of breaking the stigma that's around affordable housing in general. And I just appreciate and respect that so much. We've said before, all of us are one life moment away from needing to live at one of our properties, right? So, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Let me give you a story about that too. We have a homeless program where we have a priority on all of our properties for somebody who's homeless, and we have our own definition of homeless. But I had this one guy that came to me, needed an apartment. He was a lighting engineer for when bands go around and things like that. He did the lighting for the stages and for the shows and things like that. Had saved up $450,000 in his 401k account. And when he was ready to retire, found out that it was all a Ponzi scheme, and now he's living in the back seat of his car. That could happen to me. That could happen to you. That could happen to anybody who's watching this.
Yeah.
So though, but for the grace of God, go I. These properties are there for people that need it, that have situations like that.
This has been such a thoughtful conversation, and I know a lot of the people listening are the ones doing this work every day on the ground. So as we wrap up, I'd love to leave them with something practical. What's one piece of advice Ron and Eric would give to property managers and service coordinators who are trying to balance safety, independence, and dignity in their communities? Let's take a listen to these final words from Ron and Eric.
I'll just say this one thing. The hardest thing that it is for my staff to do is to find a deceased resident. A lot of these people live with us for 10, 15, 20 years, and we get to know them. We get to know their families. We enjoy working with them and talking to them and having them. And then one day, one of the staff walks into an apartment on a call from a family member because they're concerned and finds a deceased resident. And that's just the very hardest thing for our staff to do. So the way I always encourage them is that you did everything right. That resident had a quality of life that was great up until the time that they passed. And all of us are going to the same place. Like my pastor said, don't take life seriously because none of us are getting out of it alive. So if you provided a quality of life for that resident up until the time that they were deceased, then you did a perfect job.
Yeah, I would add that my mind went to more of a supportive kind of encouragement to the staff, because I feel like there's a lot of site level team members that, they think they're doing all the right things. They are handling a ton of paperwork every day. They're handling all the phone calls, all the complaints. Then they go find that deceased body. And, there are a lot of times, I think, at the site level where people truly feel, as the employees, not the residents, the employees that just feel like they're on their own. And I would just say that, this community that we're part of with affordable housing, specifically seniors too, there's a lot of good people that have, these types of stories, and we know what it's like, and we've been in the industry for a lot of time. And there's a ton of encouraging, supportive types of resources out there, that whether it's a podcast like this or a support group, or it's, doing an online training or webinar, to kind of share ideas and how to deal with challenges at the building. There's a lot of that out there that I think can be helpful.
This conversation really highlighted something we don't always say out loud in this industry, that the work happening in senior housing isn't just operational, it's deeply human. It's about creating environments where people feel safe, yes, but also respected, heard, and still in control of their own lives. And that balance between safety, independence, and dignity, it's not something you solve once. It's something teams are navigating every single day in big decisions and small moments. Eric, Ron, thank you both again for your insight, your honesty, and the work you're doing to move this forward. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us for another episode of the SAHMA Exchange, where policy, people, and property management meet. We'll see you next time.